Okay, so our yeast is hydrated. Our stuff is ready to start actually making mead. So we got our jar and it looks a little foamy. It's all good. No worries. All we are going to do at this point is take 3 pounds of honey and pour in. So right here, I've got a 2 pound of Great Lakes honey. Just gonna dump her in. Dump her all in the bottom. And then what I'll do once this bottle is empty, because obviously honey is very sticky, I will go get some hot water about right now. And as soon as it's done dripping, I'm not making this for anybody, it's just for me. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get hot water, because honey is a lot more liquidy when it's hot, and then it also dissolves in hot water. And it's not like I'm adding anything besides water to this jug, so it is fine to fill the honey bottles up with water with a little bit of remnants of honey left. I'm just gonna throw the cap back on, right? Throw this cap back on and just give it a shake. And what that'll do is it should start incorporating the rest of the honey, making like a honey water solution. So as you can see, the water's kind of yellow, and there's no honey left in the bottle. And then we just get all our honey that way. Because honey's not cheap, man. And then I was planning on this just being a traditional mead. Well, not like traditional, but just honey. The first 2 batches I ever made were blackberry and cherry, which the blackberry one is done. Cherry one's still doing its thing for a little bit though. Sorry. But I have some vanilla bean and cinnamon that I'm actually gonna throw into this one just for some little extra notes. I was talking earlier how the yeast is like a representation of the biosphere, because yeast is a living thing. That's how alcohol gets made, is the yeast eat the sugar that's in here and it pees alcohol and poops carbon dioxide pretty much, or farts carbon dioxide. That's why you have to have the airlock on there, because a bunch of air is getting built up in here as it ferments. And you gotta let that out without letting air in, because oxygen, just like what happens when you have oxygen come into contact with metal, alcohol can oxidize, and it gives weird tastes. So that's why we have a one-way airlock, so that CO2 can go out and oxygen can't get in. That is also a representation of the atmosphere, being that CO2 is getting released and O2, you know. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the yeast is the biosphere, the CO2 and the O2 is the atmosphere, and the water that's actually used in the yeast, that's a representation of the hydrosphere. Then here in a second, I will get to the representation of the geosphere. Okay, so that is all our honey in there, which you can't, well, actually, as you can see, honey and the little bit of water that we threw in there. So, next, I got 3 cinnamon sticks. 1, 2, 3. And I've got 2/3 of a vanilla bean. I ended up opening it up and cutting it in half, just so maximum, or a decent amount of surface area. And then all I'm gonna do is fill this up almost all the way with water. So let me go do that. Gotta do warm water, because yeast doesn't like too hot or too cold, because it's a living thing, just like us. If it's too hot or cold, it gets stressed out and ends up making a couple of chemicals that do not taste good at all. So we got some water here. That's just a little bit cooler than our hand, which is good because our body temperature is like 90 degrees. Our hands are a little cooler. So all I'm doing is filling that up. And once it's done, I'm gonna throw a couple other things in there, and then I'll put our yeast in there. All right. Don't drop it, don't drop it. Boom. So you can see the water at the top. So all I'm gonna do now is add our yeast solution, and you can tell that it gets really cloudy after that. And then what I'm gonna add is this stuff. This is yeast nutrient. This is just like a little bit of stuff to give the yeast a nice little kickstart. Make sure it's getting healthy fermentation. So we just throw a teaspoon of that in there. And then the way I was gonna represent the geosphere, this stuff right here is called bentonite. What it does is as the whole meat is fermenting, what happens is it gets very cloudy in there. Lots of sediments from the yeast, the honey, the water, all kinds of stuff in there. And you want a clear meat when it's done. What this is it's called a clarifying agent. And it's a kind of clay that comes from volcanic ash. As the yeast is fermenting, what happens is the CO2 bubbles rise up. The particles of bentonite clay are risen up with those. And what happens is they expand as they go up. They latch onto certain sediments. And what happens is once they latch on, they start sinking. And they sink all the way to the bottom. And that's why you have to siphon your meat when you transfer it into a container, because there's a bunch of stuff at the bottom that you don't want. So all I'm gonna do, it's a little less than half a teaspoon, because half a teaspoon would be like for 1¼ gallons. This is 1 gallon, so I gotta go a little less. Just gonna toss that in there. And then all I'm gonna do is stir. Get all the way to the honey at the bottom. Make sure it is all homogenized. Get a good funnel going down there, a cyclone, as today's lecture was about. Going counterclockwise, just like a cyclone would in the northern hemisphere. And then what I'm probably gonna do is just fill the rest up with a little bit of water. That way we get a whole gallon. Because if you're making it, you might as well make as much as you can. So, if you look, now we have a nice ugly yellow jar of liquid. So all you really need to make mead, because the bentonite and the yeast nutrient is technically extra. I like to have my yeast clear fast. That's why I have the bentonite. All you need to make a mead is yeast, water, and honey. That's it. So as I close this real quick. Last thing to do is to fill our airlock. So what happens is there'll be water like up to here. And what happens is this little middle chunk will kind of rise up until it lets out enough space to where the CO2 can pop out. So first we gotta get our water in there. All right. So that's just about, I don't know if you can see it. There's a little line there that says Maxville. I just go up to that. There is that. We put our little lid on it just to make sure no flies or anything get on there. Then we throw a lid. This little black part, it's just a little hole in there with a rubber like stopper, little rubber O-ring that makes sure that this is airtight. So, just making sure my airlock is nice and in there. Yeah. Make sure this is screwed on all the way. Bada boom, bada bang. We have and actually, you can already see air is building up in there. Oh, shut up about low power. If you look, that little space at the top there, that's CO2 already being built up. Not very much right now. It'll be way more later. But it is already starting to kind of do its thing. But that is a batch of mead. And that's what I'm creating for my Earth Science project.